Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. I figured we would do a live show today. It's been a while since we've done a live show, so might as well talk about Bitcoin and figure out what is going on. So let me post this a couple different places, and we will jump in. All right. So here we sit. We've talked about Bitcoin a lot recently, and look, I know a lot of the videos I've been putting out over the last few weeks have been exceptionally bearish, and really over the last few months. But we have to go with the data as always. We have to understand, what is the data saying? Are we risk on? Are we risk off? Again, we've showed the dollar, the US dollar currency index remains in a parabolic move. Therefore, risk on markets aren't really doing that well. And I mean, it's not just Bitcoin, it's everything, right? I mean, literally everything, basically. I mean, like, Bitcoin's down, altcoins by association are, of course, down, but you also have equities. The Nasdaq actually just put in a lower low. Okay, so let me switch this back over to the normal candles. So the Nasdaq's putting in a lower low. The S&P is in danger of putting in a lower low. Hell, even gold is, I mean, gold's probably going to put in new all-time highs later this year, but it hasn't really done a whole lot recently. Um, but Bitcoin, it's still trying to hold these higher lows. But I got to tell you guys, I mean, I'm not the most optimistic about these higher lows, and I've said that before. A lot of times when you get a large group of people like us watching these technically higher low thing, eventually it breaks, right? Eventually it doesn't hold. The stress just becomes too great. So, I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I don't have the highest expectations for Bitcoin in the short term to hold this line. I mean, if we were to just draw the line just to show you at what point could you officially say the trend line is broken, if you go with the most conservative view and just connect the wicks, you could, I mean, really going below, say, 36.5 is breaking the trend line, and putting in, going below 34.4 would be a lower low. Okay, so again, I think what you should do is you should likely temper your expectations in the short term, because the markets still remain risk off. We'll answer questions here in a little bit. The markets remain risk off right now. Again, it's not rocket science. All you have to do is you just go compare to the dollar, and you can see it's clear as day, right? Pin it to a new scale, switch Bitcoin to log, and you can see, when Bitcoin's going up, the dollar's going down, right? When Bitcoin's going up, you'll see the dollar going down. But the reverse is also true, right? If Bitcoin's going down, you'll see the dollar going up. And so, I sit here on April 26, 2022, and we're watching the dollar just go parabolic, right? I mean, the dollar is going parabolic. And again, we're going to get into that a little bit later in the video as to how parabolic could the dollar get before, damn it, when is it gonna show some mercy? But again, right now, I think the best way to navigate this market is to generally assume that risk on assets remain risky. The market is risk off. Bitcoin is basically sitting on a ledge, right? If you guys remember our Cliff Dweller live streams, maybe I should have just called this Cliff Dwellers, but we're sort of sitting on a ledge right now, where technically you could argue that Bitcoin's putting in higher lows, and technically you would be right. And as I've said before, being technically correct is in fact the best way to be correct. And maybe we'll look back at this time in a few months and say, well, maybe Bitcoin held the lows and we were all freaking out for nothing. But I think the problem right now that I see is that if you have things like the Nasdaq pushing lower and things like the dollar pushing higher, the dollar can't keep pushing higher without continuing to exert downward pressure on risk on assets like Bitcoin and equities. So I look at the market and I say, all right, we've been rejected by the 200-day SMA, okay? And generally, when you see this type of price action, where resistance levels are being held as resistance and support levels just get sliced through like they're not even there, it's a bear market, right? It's a bear market structure. And I understand that a lot of people don't like me calling it a bear market. I see the comments and whatnot. And you're allowed to call it whatever you want. I mean, you can call it a kangaroo market, you can call it whatever you want to call it, right? But generally speaking, when Bitcoin has this type of price action where resistance levels hold as resistance and support levels tend to not hold, it is more indicative of a bear market, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. And the reason there's nothing wrong with that is I've said it before, right? Bull markets make you money, bear markets make you rich. When you're chasing trends in bull markets, you're likely not going to get rich from it because you're just chasing the trends from what other people identified as a great investment about 1 or 2 years before you did. So the thing that you need to do right now is understand we're risk off, understand that Bitcoin could go lower, understand that alt Bitcoin valuations could go a lot lower, and be patient. Have some cash on hand, be patient, and then come in when no one wants to buy, which maybe is now, right? It maybe is now, but I think we need to see what the dollar is going to do here. Is the dollar putting in a triple top? We're going to talk about that in a minute, but we're going to go look at that here in just a minute. The dollar, Bitcoin, right? It's rejected off the 200-day, okay? And if you just connect the daily candles rather than the wicks, it looks something like this. And this is something I want to draw your attention to because we've drawn the parallels to this to 2018 many, many times, okay? So let's just look at it again. If Bitcoin, okay, if it puts in a lower low, it's an if. I don't know if it's going to or not, but it doesn't, I mean, it seems like it could. If we put in a lower low, what would that mean? Where would that mean Bitcoin goes? If we go back to the low 30s, okay? So if Bitcoin goes back to somewhere around the summer low, somewhere, 30K plus or minus a couple K, right? If we go to those levels, no guarantee we're going to go to those levels. But if we do, and the market certainly seems bearish, then you're talking about going back down to those levels and then seeing a nice bounce, okay? So if it were to continue to emulate this, so what would that look like? It would mean dropping, putting in a lower low, and then just bouncing right back up to 40K or 42K or something. Like we could go back down to 32K and be back at 42K a couple weeks later potentially if it emulates 2018. Here's the thing though. Here's the thing, and this is the important part. Okay, so if Bitcoin puts in a lower low and bounces back up to 42K. If you're heavy Bitcoin, you don't care, right? I mean, you don't care. It's just the same thing. I mean, it's like, okay, who cares? It's the same price it has been for the last year. The problem, as I've said before, is that if we put in a lower low, all Bitcoin valuations are likely going to get wrecked. Like they don't recover the same way that Bitcoin does. Okay, you need to understand that. If you joined in 2021, you're probably completely oblivious to this fact. I was oblivious to it once upon a time. I'm not any better. It's just something you learn once you live through it a few times. You need to understand that if Bitcoin puts in a lower low, all Bitcoin valuations get wrecked, and Bitcoin is a safer place to be, right? That's the point, is that Bitcoin is in fact a safer place to be if we in fact put in a lower low. And the way you hedge is to just be heavier in Bitcoin, because look, if the dominance doesn't go up, I think it's safe to say that Bitcoin has to go up before you're going to see any type of alt season again. Can we at least agree on that, right? Can we agree on Bitcoin has to show strength before altcoins are going to do anything, right? I mean, you think altcoins are going to do something with Bitcoin chilling at 38K? Probably not, right? Probably not. So what does that mean, right? What does that mean? Well, what I think it means, and again, I can be wrong about things. I've been wrong about plenty of things, right? Plenty of things I've been wrong about. But what I think it means is that the Bitcoin dominance has to go up, right? I mean, how do you get to an altcoin season without Bitcoin showing strength? And if Bitcoin capitulates, the dominance is also going to go up because it means you put in a lower low. So I look at it and say Bitcoin's your hedge and altcoins are risky. Because Bitcoin has to do something before altcoins make sense, in my opinion, right? It has to do something. It either has to rally past the bull market support band, past the 20-week SMA, which means it's going above 42K, or it needs to go down. It needs to capitulate. One of those two things, right? So I think Bitcoin, Bitcoin certainly is the least risky asset, I think, within crypto, and at least still gives you the exposure to the asset class. So that if crypto throws it's a curveball and Bitcoin goes parabolic in a few weeks because something crazy happens, I don't know, like maybe they approve a spot ETF or something, then at least you have exposure, right? At least you have exposure to Bitcoin. But I do want people to remain cautious because, again, as I said, we are in a very risk off time right now. And with the Fed meeting coming up May 3rd to May 4th, yeah, I mean, maybe we'll bounce after that, right? I mean, so if we do put in a lower low over the next week or two, perhaps we'll bounce sometime after that. The counterpoint to all of this, because I try to do a good job of remaining unbiased, because it is easy for me to get biased about things. Like I have, I do certain things in my portfolio, and then I want to see the portfolio go in the direction that I planned for it, right? So like, I say I think the dominance is going to go up. Well, I want it to go up. So I'm naturally biased to look for reasons that I think are going to make the dominance go up, you know. But I think the one thing to look at, and I know a lot of you guys don't care about it, but you should care about it, is the dollar, the US dollar currency index. I mean, it's sitting at 102, over 102, and it's going parabolic. Why is that important? Right? Why is it important that the dollar is going parabolic? Well, it tells you what I've been saying for the last few months, and that's that we're in a risk off time, right? We're not looking at risk on market conditions. What do we need to see? Do we need to see the dollar go down? No, we don't. I mean, look at what happened in 2019. In 2019, Bitcoin went up a lot, right? It went up a lot in the first half of 2019. What was the dollar doing in 2019? It was going up. It was going up. But the angle of attack wasn't as steep, right? That's the thing. You got to look at the angle of attack on these things. Again, it is dependent on your aspect ratio, but you compare it to, say, 2018, the angle of attack was like 80 degrees on this aspect ratio. In 2019, the angle of attack was like a very measly, 20 degrees or something. What's the angle of attack today? We've been just going up again at about 80 something degree angle of attack. So do you need the dollar to go down for Bitcoin to just chill out for a few weeks or a few months? No, you don't. Bitcoin could stretch its legs back up to the upside, but it's likely not going to do so if the dollar is going parabolic. It would need to slow down some, kind of like it did in 2019 or like it did over here. I mean, the dollar wasn't really going down a lot over here in 2016, but it didn't stop Bitcoin from doing fairly well. Like Bitcoin was doing fairly well back in 2016, right? You guys remember 2016. If we just go remind you, for those who don't remember, if you weren't part of crypto back then, 2016 was a relatively good year for Bitcoin. But what's interesting about 2016, it was a good year for Bitcoin, but it wasn't a bubble year, right? It wasn't a bubble year. It was just tracking the fair value fit to non-bubble data. It didn't break out until May of 2017, right? May of 2017 is when it broke out. And then it only took about 7 months later, and we were at the top of the regression band, right? Only about 7 months after we broke out. Okay, so 2016 was a good year for Bitcoin. 2019 was a good year for Bitcoin. The dollar was not going down that much during those times, but it wasn't going parabolic. Now, the thing you have to start to like dig into when thinking about, well, what could actually turn this market around, is to say, well, where could the dollar ultimately top out, right? Where could it ultimately top out? So perhaps you could go look at things like the RSI for the dollar currency, or for the US dollar currency index, and we can make comparisons to where it's been in the past. Like the weekly RSI is currently sitting at 77 almost, which is technically this is certainly technically overbought. The problem is it can stay at these levels for a long time before it sort of reverses course. So like this is what this is the weekly RSI. The worst it got in 2014 was, it went all the way up to around 88 or 89. So there is still theoretically some room for it to stretch its legs, just based on what we've seen it do only just a couple cycles ago. So certainly seems like there could be room for further upside on the dollar. If you go look at things like the 2-week RSI, you can see where it currently is. It's around 75, and the highest it reached back in 2014, 2015 was around 90. So if we were to sort of just continue this move out, if I could actually draw a line parallel to what was already being shown, right? If something like this happens, you could be looking at it reversing course in Q3, right? Maybe the dollar will finally start to slow down in Q3 and then start to roll over and either head back down or not go up so quickly. So that would be, well, kind of some of the stuff we've seen before. Now, the reason all this stuff is important is because I know the markets are depressing. I know a lot of people have the case of the bear market blues, but you need to understand that if you have the right strategy going in to these types of phases, you can create a lot of wealth later on. Okay. In my mind, there's no mistaking that this is a bear market. I mean, to me, this is a bear market through and through. It looks like a bear. If it talks like one, if it walks like one, a bear market is a bear market is a bear market. So the only question in my mind is how can we best position ourselves to take advantage of it. And so I've over the last few months we've talked about the bear thesis and where that could ultimately take us and what that would mean for alt valuations and whatnot. So the thing you need to understand with altcoins is, patience is a good thing, right? I mean, over the last 6 months, have you missed out on anything by maybe staying clear of alts? No. I mean, this is basically what the premium stuff I've been saying, stay away from altcoins for the last 5 months or so, or be at least altcoin light. So I think the thing is like, okay, well, how do you take advantage of this at this point, right? One of the things I think to do is recognize where we are, okay? Recognize what needs to happen for things to actually go the way direction we want, and obviously the dollar, right? Watch the dollar go back down. You'd like to see, equities like tech stocks cool off a little bit. Remember, Bitcoin has not had a parabolic rally unless the Nasdaq is in an uptrend. We've never seen Bitcoin really have a parabolic rally with the Nasdaq in a downtrend. So with the Nasdaq in a downtrend right now, why are we to assume that Bitcoin is necessarily going to bottom here? Now, again, I said I like to be unbiased. We're going to look at all sides of the spectrum here. The counterpoint to a lot of this stuff, right? The counterpoint to a lot of this stuff is, well, what if the dollar is topping now, right? Which I don't think it makes sense to put a lot of your eggs in that basket, okay? But it is possible, right? It is. What's going on with my mouse? I don't know. It is possible that it's topping now. I would say it's more likely that, in my mind, it's more likely that the dollar will continue its rally ultimately, even if it finds some resistance here. The reason I'm saying that it might find some resistance is because, well, if you draw your imaginary line in the sand and you connect the peak from 2016 and the peak from 2020, guess where we are, right? I mean, guess where we are right now. So I'm not going to sit here and say that anything's impossible. I mean, obviously, I would love for Bitcoin to pick things back up and do well. But remember, altcoins aren't likely going to do well until Bitcoin does, right? I mean, we see what happens. Alt Bitcoin valuations just keep going down for the most part. The dominance is sort of slowly moving higher. I mean, it's approaching 42%. So I look at the dollar and I say, maybe it's going to come into some resistance here. And if it does, perhaps Bitcoin will stretch its legs again. Another way to look at this, rather than drawing a trend line, which again, as we know, they're dubious at best, is perhaps just draw sort of a range here and kind of see where Bitcoin or where the dollar was rejected from in prior moves, and that would actually give it a little bit more room to go up, all the way up to almost about 104. Something to consider though when looking at this, and again, we just want to cover all our bases here. Let's switch this over. We're going to switch this over to a line chart. Okay, sort of makes it a little bit easier to follow. And we're going to look at this. Okay, so you could argue that you had a top here, and actually let me change this color to, let's do light blue. So maybe you could argue that we had a top here, we had a top here, we had a breakout here, and the retest was June 2018, and then this was the double bottom that occurred for the dollar, right? So you could argue something like that. Furthermore, if you want to say it looks like if you connect these, again, this is all, I don't even know. I only like doing this stuff, honestly. But, it could be that the next bull market for Bitcoin is sort of like the back test of this trend line. Just like this bull market was the back test of that one once upon a time, right? So like the 2017 bull market was the back test of this one. So maybe the next bull market for Bitcoin is the back test of this trend line eventually. But it is just something to maybe speculate on when talking about the US dollar currency index. Now, when looking at the regression bands, listen, I'm telling you guys, these regression bands, I think they've done a fairly good job so far. I mean, we published these back in 2019. I think I published them right here. It was somewhere around here when I published these regression bands. And they've done a pretty good job so far. Are they perfect? No. We went below it once upon a time in March of 2020. And I remember thinking like, well, dang, this one didn't last long, right? Like this metric didn't last long if we're already going to break below it. And it ended up being a wick. We ended up basically bouncing off of it immediately and ultimately going up to the top regression band, okay? And so, you know, I look at this chart and say, well, people always ask me, well, when are you going to make another accumulation phase of a lifetime video, Ben? Like, when are you going to do that? The accumulation phase of a lifetime videos, they're not up to me, right? They basically make themselves. Whenever we're down here, these are the accumulation phase of a lifetime videos, okay? Whenever those phases occur, I don't know when they're going to occur. I don't know. I mean, you know, but these phases are the accumulation phase of a lifetime videos because you're essentially accumulating in the build up to a new rally. Okay, we've gotten a few of them over the years. So here they are, right? Accumulation phase of a lifetime. What would that mean for today? What does that put it? And where would it put it in, say, a year from now? Let's suppose it takes a year or something, or say 5 years, right? It could be 5 years for all we know. I don't know. But today, accumulation phase of a lifetime would mean Bitcoin at 22K, right? At 22K. That's a pretty low valuation, right? There's no guarantee we go to 22K. You need to consider, too, that these are monotonically increasing functions. So the longer it takes us to get down there, assuming we're going to go down there at some point, the higher this number will ultimately be. For instance, you know, let's extend this out until, say, the end of the year. Okay, I mean, we're just sort of extending it out. By the end of the year, the quote-unquote fair value fit to non-bubble data would actually correspond to the summer of 2021 low. Okay, so it ultimately depends on how long it takes us to get there. If it takes us a year for, you know, and we basically just allow this thing to play catch up, then, you know, that could ultimately be a huge accumulation phase, even though it's not that low compared to where we currently are. If, on the other hand, we capitulate down there sooner rather than later, then that could be the accumulation phase of a lifetime. On the other hand, if Bitcoin continues to just play in no man's land for a few more years and then goes back up to the top, then maybe it'll be way over here at 40 or 50K when we're back at the accumulation phase of a lifetime. So, you know, people ask me this all the time, is this the accumulation phase of a lifetime? Because we made those videos back in 2019 and 2020. And I can't say that it is. I mean, I'm not saying that it's the worst time to buy Bitcoin. Look, the worst time, okay, let me say it like this. Bitcoin's currently down, 45% from the all-time high? Buying Bitcoin when it's down 45% from the all-time high, it's not necessarily the best time to buy, but it's certainly not the worst, right? Obviously, the worst time to buy it would have been at 69K. So it's not the worst time to buy, but I would argue that we could easily retest some lower levels before ultimately trending higher. Okay, I do think that, you know, this could easily happen. It really kind of depends on what the dollar does and what the Nasdaq does. So here's where it gets interesting, because we talked about the US dollar currency index, right? Is this going to be a major top coming up here in the next few weeks? I don't know about that, right? I mean, I will say that I don't feel so strongly convicted that I have to pour all my money into altcoins right now, speculating on it. I would say that it is a possibility, but I'd like to see Bitcoin show some strength first, right? I'd like to see Bitcoin show some strength. It hasn't showed strength in a long time. If it can show me strength, then game on, right? But I think where it becomes a little bit interesting is what happens if the dollar does end up, you know, topping at this level, which again, I don't think is the most likely scenario, okay? But it is a scenario, so we're gonna go through it anyways. So if the dollar does top here, then I would have to imagine it would correspond to a double bottom on the Nasdaq. Now, technically, the Nasdaq put in a lower low. I mean, technically speaking, and again, as we say before, being technically correct is in fact the best way to be correct, but you could argue the Nasdaq, if it can muster up the courage to bounce here, then you could argue that it's a double bottom, right? You could try to argue that it's a double bottom. We did technically put in a lower low. Have we seen that type of price action by the Nasdaq in the past? We have. If you go back, you'll find examples of the Nasdaq sort of putting in a double bottom and then ultimately carrying on. It actually did this in late 2015, early 2016. And even going to the late 2016, where it sort of went through this phase of a bottom and then bounced, actually put in a new all-time high, and then it had a double bottom about half a year later. So, is it possible? Well, it certainly is possible. I mean, if you go look again at the dollar, it was actually a double bottom that formed on the dollar. Let me switch this back to the daily time frame. We're going to switch this back to candles. So if you go look at the dollar, it was actually a double bottom formation that caused this thing arguably to turn around, right? A double bottom. And so, I mean, look, I don't want to be bearish, right? I'd rather be bullish. Let's just see. I mean, let's see what happens tomorrow with the Nasdaq. Like, is it gonna keep going down? I mean, if it keeps going down, then I think you're just looking at a downtrend, right? It doesn't really need to be any more complicated than that. But if it bounces off of this level, like if the Nasdaq bounces off of this $13,000 level, and you see the dollar come back down off of this dubiously drawn trend line, then maybe there's a case to be made. But again, well, maybe we should just revisit this in a week. I think it makes sense to be patient. That's what I think. I think it makes sense to stick with whatever strategy you're doing. If you're DCAing Bitcoin, you can keep DCAing it. But I think that it makes sense to be patient and to wait things out, to sometimes pay the premium to see what's going to happen before betting the family farm. Not that you should ever bet the family farm on crypto, because it's a very highly risky asset class. So I don't know. I will say that with the dollar approaching some pretty high levels it hasn't seen in a while, I wouldn't be that surprised to see some type of a hesitation a little bit. But we've actually seen that already many times, so that wouldn't really be that surprising. We hesitated around the 96 level for a few months. We hesitated around the 99 level for a few months. So is it possible that we hesitate around the 102 level for a few months, right? Like 96, 99, 102? Yeah, it is possible. So that's why I'm saying let's keep an eye on the dollar and see how the Nasdaq responds tomorrow. And if the Nasdaq puts in a double bottom, then maybe Bitcoin will bounce back to 40K. However, if the Nasdaq does not put in a double bottom and the dollar keeps on rallying, and the Nasdaq continues to really hammer home that it's going lower and it's putting in a much lower low, that's where I have a hard time seeing Bitcoin hold this line. Okay, that's where I would get somewhat skeptical on how long can Bitcoin hold this trend line if the dollar is continuing to ultimately go parabolic, and if the Nasdaq is ultimately putting in a lower low. So that's kind of where I see the market currently standing right now. Okay, now what's interesting is that the fair value logarithmic regression band for Bitcoin, which arguably is it's a different way to talk about the fair value. So let me make sure people understand this. You have this one, which is fit to non-bubble data. And I made this one before I made the other one. So the reason I made this one was because I looked at this thing back in 2019 and I was like, that there seems to be these parabolic phases with Bitcoin that you probably shouldn't fit the data to. Why not fit it to when only the smart money is buying, right? The smart money buys down here when we're in the regression band, right? That's where the smart money historically comes in. So I fit it to data through that level, okay? So the fair value fit to non-bubble data is 22K, which also happens to correspond to the 200-week moving average, right? It happens to correspond to the 200-week moving average. Okay, so that is something to consider. I mean, you can see that when the 200-week moving average became equal to the fair value fit to non-bubble data, that's where we had a capitulation. That's where we are right now. So that's what has me a little bit on edge and wondering if we're going to see some type of capitulation in the next few months. But I will say that the fair value fit to all data, so we're not going to be, we're not going to discriminate against non-bubble data or against bubble data. We're just going to say, you know what, let's just take all the data, let's fit it to a regression curve and see where it puts us. If you're not familiar with this equation, it's just y equals 10 raised to the power a times the ln of x minus b, and you got to fit your coefficients, right? X is time, and b, a and b are your fitted coefficients. So you can think of them as like c of I, right? and you have one, you have the other. So this is your equation. And what does it give you? Where does it say the fair value is based on all data? Based on all data, it says the fair value is at 36.7K. Again, this is based on all data, not just non-bubble data. So non-bubble data says the fair value is 22K. All data says the fair value is 36.7K. What does that mean? What it means to me is that if we go below 36K, we are now undervalued. Okay, so that's what it would mean. If we go below 36.7K, it means that Bitcoin's undervalued. And if it goes below that level and it goes to the lower regression band, that's where all the smart money buys, right? That's where the longer term investors really load up if and when it occurs. Okay. But right now, I think you could argue we're still slightly overvalued, even with respect to the fair value regression band fit to all data, because it says the fair value is 36.7K. Now, what's interesting is we've had this one for a while, and you look at the last 2 wicks on Bitcoin. Okay, we had one wick. Where did it go? It went down to the fair value at around 33K back in January. And then in February, it went down to the fair value at 34K. So if it were to go down to the fair value again, it would mean going to lower than $37,000. So I think the thing to consider here is if Bitcoin goes below the fair value, then we're now undervalued, right? You could argue that Bitcoin is now undervalued, and that if we go to the lower regression band, which is fit to non-bubble data, then that's the accumulation phase of a lifetime. Okay, but this is currently where we stand. Now, what's interesting, and I've said this before, is the lower bound on this chart corresponds to the summer low, right? The summer low of 2021. Okay, so the lower bound on the fair value regression band corresponds to the summer low. The last time we went to the summer low, the lower bound on this was actually at 21,000. Okay, so I'll say that again. The lower bound of the fair value regression band is now at around the summer of 2021 low. Why is that somewhat interesting? Well, if you go back to 2013, right? If you go all the way back to, if it loads, I assume am I still live? Hopefully we're still live over here. Okay, it looked like things froze for a little bit. So the reason why I was pointing this out is because if we do what 2013 did, you can see that 2013 went down to the bottom of the fair value regression band, right? It went down to the bottom, okay? At 60, let me see it, at around $65 or so. That's where it bottomed in 2013. So the reason I'm saying it is just keep it in mind. Obviously, I know a lot of people are calling for much lower prices, and we could go to much lower prices for sure, but that is where the lower bound of our fair value regression band is, and it does correspond to the 2021 low. I would argue that if Bitcoin does put in a lower low and goes down to the lower 30s, like a lower local low, then there's a good chance we would bounce there regardless, okay? Because, I mean, even in 2018, we bounced, and we went back up to the 200-day again after putting in a lower low. So if Bitcoin goes back down to 30K plus or minus a few K, I think there's a good chance it's going to bounce right back up to the 40K level. And then we have to fight with a 200-day SMA again. So that's something, you know, like maybe it plays out like that, right? And you have to fight the 200-day at 42K, which would then correspond to this level, right? So if we put in a lower low at the lower bound of the fair value regression band and then bounce back up to the 200-day, that's where the fight would likely ensue. Okay, so that's kind of where I see Bitcoin right now. Obviously, that's a lot to take in. Obviously, it depends on what the dollar's doing, what the Nasdaq's doing. I mean, it has been sort of behaving like a tech stock, for being completely honest. But that's where we currently are. So, what questions do you guys have? By the way, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. Sorry, I'm just gonna... Okay, let me see the chat. Yeah, look, guys, I know some people are calling for an alt season and whatnot imminently. I don't see it. I mean, I know people are more bullish than me on an alt season. I don't see it, right? I don't see it right now. It doesn't mean it can't come in a few months, but I keep hearing people call for an alt season 1 or 2 months away. They keep calling for it. I don't see it right now. I think the market conditions would have to change a lot for that to happen. So I'm gonna err on the side of alt season not occurring. Doesn't mean that alts can't go 10%, 20% here and there. A lot of times, if an altcoin drops 20%, it can then bounce back up 10, 15% or something. But I'm just not seeing like a 50% every single week for a lot of altcoins happening under these market conditions. So I would say, I would err away from the idea of an alt season being imminent. I would argue it's likely not. I think we are, we're definitely in a more tricky part of the market than just everything goes up 50% every week. Okay. When is Bitcoin going to 1 million? So I don't think Bitcoin will hit 1 million this decade. I think it'll be next decade if it's going to do that. I don't think it'll be this decade. So not in the 2020s. Probably the mid to late 2030s, honestly. Um, why is the US dollar rallying so hard? I think one of the reasons is because, people are just fearful of what the Fed's going to do because inflation keeps soaring. If it's a common question. You also have to remember that the dollar is basically measuring its strength against other fiat currencies. So it's just outperforming a basket of other fiat currencies. It's not like it's outperforming, something necessarily strong. It's just outperforming other weak things. Um, but I do think one of the reasons is because inflation is sky high and investors are constantly wondering what is the Fed going to do about it. And, the Fed is pretty hawkish, right? I mean, they're saying they might be raising rates by 50 basis points um, next month. And I think investors generally are just kind of spooked as to how long the rate hiking cycle is going to last for, how long is QT going to last for, and so they're flocking to safer assets that are not dependent on risk on market conditions. So that's why you see people leaving stocks and leaving crypto and just sort of hunkering down in the relative state safety of the U.S. dollar. Will I upgrade my lighting and sound? No, not right now. Yeah, someone says well number three bought. I saw that. I mean, I actually have it up right here. They bought 800 Bitcoin over the last few days. They bought some on April 22nd and April 25th. Um, they have, but you know, they they like to just sort of slowly scale in when prices go down, and they slowly scale out when prices go up. I know it's a crazy strategy, right? Buy low, sell high. But yeah, they picked up 500 Bitcoin. It looks like yesterday. Um, why do I think whales are still buying? I mean, I think this whale is just trading the ranges. I don't. I mean, if you look at what he's been doing, he's actually been slowly decreasing the Bitcoin position since, really since February. It has been going up locally though over the last few weeks. I mean, I think sometimes they just sort of trade the range to try to maybe slowly increase their Bitcoin stack without having to actually put more fiat in. Do I believe Elon buying Twitter will have any long-term effects on crypto? Um, I mean, maybe some cryptocurrency, maybe like the meme coins if that's what he promotes, but I don't think Elon buying Twitter is going to immediately make markets risk on. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that. Yeah, I'm not. I mean, I think Ether's valuation against Bitcoin doesn't look so great to me at the moment. Um, I think that when you look at this type of a chart, it looks very reminiscent of sort of like that distribution phase that Bitcoin had in early 2021. This is the Ether Bitcoin chart. So, I mean, I know people are going to sit here and say it's technically an uptrend, lower or higher lows, and technically you're right. But I just want to warn people that this could, in fact, be some type of a distribution phase for Ether's valuation against Bitcoin, and we could come back down this way for a while before ultimately, hopefully, going higher. Let me pull up the Bitcoin chart. All right, what other questions do we have? Um, how long have we been going? 41 minutes. Yeah, the Bears are in full force. How can we send in questions for DCA live? I mean, maybe post on their Twitter accounts. I mean, you just post it in the chat when we do it. I don't. No, I don't really use the fibs. There's plenty of people that do that. How old's the channel? 2019. XMR thoughts. I used to hold Monero. I actually sold my Monero. I don't even remember when it was, but it was probably like 8 months ago or something. Maybe half a year ago. I don't know. I used to hold Monero. I don't hold any anymore. I mean, maybe like I have one or something, but I don't really hold any anymore because it just underperforms. I mean, it underperforms Bitcoin and underperforms ETH, so I don't really see the point. My personal thoughts about a bottom. I think we sort of just went through it. I think that if we drop to the summer lows, we'll likely see a good bounce off of those levels. Okay, so if this, then this is likely what I'm thinking. Um, and if the markets continue to stay risk off and we have to retest it again, and if we capitulate, then you're basically looking at like somewhere around 20K is what I would consider to be the worst case scenario. I mean, that's just what I would consider to be worst case. I don't know if it's actually going to happen. When back in the summer of 2021, I said worst case scenario was going back to like 14K because that was where the 200-week SMA was. Um, but I would say 30K has a decent amount of support. Probably worst case scenario would be around 20K plus or minus a few K. So I mean it could be 23K, it could be 18K. I don't know. That would be worst case scenario, I think. But I think if we're gonna get there, it would take a while because I mean I would think there's gonna be some support here at this summer lows of 2021. Um, can we look at the logarithmic curves? We've already looked at those. Yeah, I do think holding cash makes sense. I just keep seeing the same questions spammed. Um, No, I mean altcoins don't look that great. I see people asking about VeChain, Chainlink, Cardano. Look, the altcoins don't look that good when we're risk off. Okay, I mean, look, you have to react to market conditions. If the market is telling you it's been risk off, we've been saying for the last several months that we're in a bear market and the market's risk off. So yeah, stop asking me about if it's what if it's time to buy altcoins because I can't. I mean, until we go back to risk on or we have some type of capitulation, it's hard for me to have change my stance on that. So I mean, I will say that altcoins remain incredibly risky because of the current market conditions and because the dollar continues to rally. If you wanna go for them, I mean, if you want to buy them, then go for it. But I would say altcoins remain very risky right now. Um, Is 75% net worth in Bitcoin and ETH excessive? I think so. 75% of your net worth in crypto seems like too much. Have channel stats dropped off? Yeah, they have actually. I can show you if you want to see them. Um, I don't mind showing that. I can pull up the analytics. So just so you guys can see it, right? If we go to lifetime, look at subscribers. I mean, it's basically fallen off a cliff here. Okay, you look at watch time hours. It's gone down a lot recently. I don't know why it's spiked today for some maybe because of the live stream, I guess. Um, but I think that when you look at this chart, this is where the bull market was, right? This back over in early 2021. We haven't done anything since then, right? New retail hasn't come into the market. Even if we like to think that they have, new retail hasn't been coming in. They're nowhere to be found right now. So, I think the idea here is that until we see new retail interest in Bitcoin, we're just not going anywhere, right? That's the point. Like until we see that come back, we're just simply not going anywhere. And you can see the stats, right? You can see the YouTube stats. It's just fallen off a cliff over here. It's like back over here in 2019, 2020. There's just not a lot of activity. So, I think that yeah, there's just not a lot going on right now in terms of new interest in crypto. It's just the way it is, right? I mean, I don't know when the next wave is going to come, but it's likely not tomorrow, right? It's likely not next week. It's probably going to be a little while. But yeah, I am holding stable coins. Do I think the Fed will try to give us a soft landing? I don't know. I mean, if you're the Fed, what do you do? I mean, I feel like whatever decision they make, it's not going to lead to good things because even if they did pivot and go back to QE, which they won't. I mean, they're not going to do that right now, I don't think. But even if they did, our asset prices would go up, but everything would be worth a lot less because inflation is just going to run crazy. So, I don't really know if there's a correct solution. I mean, I think everyone would like for them or a lot of people in crypto, I think would like for them to reverse course, but I'm not really seeing it happen immediately. I think they have to go through at least some a longer rate hiking cycle. That way they can at least lower them in the future to try to maybe get things under control again. But you can't lower them if they're at zero, right? I mean, obviously they're not at zero right now, but they have been for a long time up until a couple months ago. Um, what altcoins will I buy in a bear market? I mean, probably some layer one, some gaming coins or something. I don't know. I mean, I think that we need some time for Bitcoin to gain strength first. What is the difference between bubble versus non-bubble data? Well, I mean, the non-bubble data is basically just looking at Bitcoin when it's not going parabolic. Okay, so if it's going parabolic, you ignore that data, and then the other data is just everything. Do I day trade? No, I don't. I don't day trade. Do I still believe in Link? I mean, I think it's a good project, but I mean, all it does is bleed against ETH, so I haven't been buying it anytime recently. If I were to looking to buy my first whole Bitcoin, where would you feel comfortable buying? I mean, buying at 38K if you have like a 4 year time frame in mind or 5 years is probably fine. But you might want to be patient. I mean, you probably should just DCA it, not just get it all at once, anyways, because if prices go lower, I mean, you could still see Bitcoin drop from here. So, I would recommend just DCAing it and scaling in more if it drops lower, and if not, then just scaling in the same way you're doing it. Can I tell us more about the correlation between the Nasdaq USD and dollar? I mean, I've done that enough. I think if you go watch the last couple of videos on my channel, we talk about that a lot, actually. Did I already talk about a possible spot ETF? I mean, like it's possible that a spot ETF would come later this year and help us recover some of these, some strength. But we've been hoping for a spot ETF for years and it still hasn't come. So I hope it happens, but I'm not holding my breath for it just because we haven't seen this type of we haven't seen it happen for many years now. I still remember in 2017, 2018, we would have been shocked if you had told us that 2022 would be here and we still wouldn't have one. But here we are, right? Also, the same thing, we would have been shocked to hear that, the like ETH 2.0 still wouldn't be here. But here we are again. So things take longer than we think. No, I think it's a bear market. I do think this is a bear market. I'm not calling this is not a bull market to me. This is a bear market to me. I'm not sure how we've missed this over the last few months, right? It's the same, any time we basically get below the bull market support band and are unable to reclaim it, and we just kind of either fall through it or get rejected by it. I mean, these are bear market conditions. Ever since late November, you could argue has been a bear market. Um, when this is red, right? I mean, this phase looks more like this, right, than anything. So it's red here. So to me, this is a bear market. I don't know why. I don't. I know some people are arguing against that, but that's just what it is to me. I understand that other people have different definitions, and that's fine. It's just what it is to me. It's a bear market. Yeah, I mean, if Bitcoin capitulates to like 20K, then that's a new cycle, right? Like it's a new cycle. It just is. If Bitcoin goes below the fair value, if it does something like this, like below the lower bound here, if Bitcoin does something like this, then it's a new cycle. And what's crazy is that if it does that, then I mean, I don't think it'll go that low, but if it does do something like this, right? So if it does something like this and then bounces back up and then comes over here, you know, the top for the next one will still probably just be between 1 to 200K because of how severe the diminishing returns have been. And we always said diminishing returns is a thing. You know, I always said back in 2021, the earliest I could see 100K happening would be the end of 2022. That's the earliest. It's more likely going to be not in 2022, but the earliest I think would be the end of 2022. And even then, I think that's somewhat optimistic right now. So, you know, I think that if it goes back down to, you know, to 20K or something, and we're chilling down there, then we have to call it a new cycle. But at that point, you're still talking about a peak between 1 to 200K, you know, within the next couple of years. So I don't really think it's changed a whole lot. I think that if we capitulate down, it's a new cycle, and if we don't, it's the same one. But that's basically where I stand on it. All right, guys, we're getting a little spammy here. Let's stop spamming. It's hard to find the questions because I keep seeing people post the same thing over and over again, and I've already answered them. Yeah, we can pull up the Heikinashi candles. So I mean, it's currently looking like a downtrend, right? It's just three candles here, large candle bodies, lower shadows. We had one upper shadow, but not that significant. Someone says it's not a bear market till I find a day job. I think it's a bear market. Gosh, you know it's you know crypto is in a downtrend when these comments are this spammy. At least the bots aren't so bad. What are the most important macro indicators? Well, they always say don't fight the Fed, right? I mean, so far that seems like a pretty good saying, don't fight the Fed. But I think that some of the other macro indicators, the risk metric, we talk about that. I think the longer term regression bands where we're talking about undervalued versus overvalued and just sort of understanding that Bitcoin moves between them. Um, right? I think these are pretty good macro indicators. Like if we're up here, it's a pretty good time to take profits. If we're down here, it's a pretty good time to buy. What are my thoughts on XRP? I mean, I don't know, guys. I mean, you know, with the whole SEC stuff, I've just been staying away from it. I do have a very small bag that I got back in like 2 years ago, but I don't really have high expectations for XRP. The fear and greed index is in extreme fear right now. Could be some move to the upside. Yeah, the problem is that it's been in extreme fear off and on for months, right? So you have to look at the moving averages of them, I think. Where do I see Solana going? Well, if Bitcoin goes lower, Solana would likely go much lower as well. I don't even, what's the price of Solana right now? Um, so 90, it's 96. I mean, if Bitcoin stays in a bear market for months, I mean, you could easily see Solana. I mean, I don't think it's going to go back down to these levels, but I mean, it could easily drop back down to, 30, 40 bucks or something if Bitcoin just remains in a bear market. Yeah, we're below the bull market support band by a few percent. I mean, you can see this is where it is. So it currently ranges from 41.7 to 42.8. Considering that it's a bear market, is DCAing slightly more aggressive a good idea? I mean, I think it depends on your time frame. Um, I mean, maybe it makes sense to be more aggressive if it continues. I mean, right now we're still at 38K. I mean, right now we're still at the same price we've been at for off and on for a year, right? All right, guys. I think we're gonna wrap it up there. Um, we've answered some questions. I talked about my thoughts on the market. Look, for me right now, it's hard not to just call it a bear market. So that's why I keep calling it a bear market, because that's just what it seems like to me. Um, you have to react to the markets. The dollar's in an uptrend, Bitcoin's in a downtrend, right? I mean, this is same thing we've said for months. So until we see things turn around with the dollar and tech stocks and whatnot, I don't really see it turning around for Bitcoin. Doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't bounce and whatnot, but I'm not really seeing a parabolic rally by Bitcoin here in the next few weeks or anything. So try to be patient, try to come up with a plan, stick to it. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. But I do appreciate you guys tuning in. If you're not subscribed, make sure you subscribe. We do have Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com, so check that out if you haven't already.